Okay. So, Boker Tov, good morning. We haven't had class in a couple of weeks, Sunday morning, because of Pesach, because of Passover. And so welcome back. And thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for listening. And we always start with a bracha, so we'll make our bracha on the coffee here. Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Shehakol Nihiyah Bidvaro. So, today's subject and topic, while a very, very important one, is also, like many things in today's environment, hotly debated, and people have very, very strong opinions, which has its pluses and has its minuses, like most things in life and in this world. And let me elaborate. This class, as I always say, Sunday morning is a class where we're going to sit and discuss some of the issues. Today will be probably a little bit more sort of scholarly, perhaps a little bit more maybe technical. I don't know if that's the correct word, than some of the other classes. And if you have a very, very strong opinion in either direction, this class is probably not for you. Meaning, if you are 1,000,000% sure and certain that you should be vaccinated, there's no point really. I mean, maybe there is. I wouldn't say there's no point, but the class is not really you're not the target audience of this class. If you are 1,000% against vaccination, then the class is probably not for you as well. And just to deviate for a moment in society today, I was having this discussion the other day with someone. People have in general become very militant in their opinions. If I have an opinion and you disagree with me, I must convince you and smarten you up, and you must come to your senses, and so on. And I would say even more than that. Unfortunately, what's happened in society is that if I disagree with you, I shut you down. Meaning, there's the concern about all the outlets of voices where if you don't agree, they just knock you off. They shut you down. And I was having this discussion with someone, and there's actually a plus to that. Everything has a silver lining. We're those who are complaining on both sides of the aisle that whether it's Facebook or YouTube or Twitter or so on shuts you down for an opinion, which is dangerous. It is dangerous. It's not what this country, freedom of speech is what this country is based on. But on the other hand, there's a certain silver lining where it used to be that if someone didn't like your opinion, especially if it was someone who had authority, they could either lock you up or, God forbid, even eliminate you, bloodshed and so on. The silver lining today is there's no need for that. If someone doesn't like your opinion, they just take you off they just shut you down, and it's done with. At least you have your life. You could go ahead and do what you need to do. So that's, I guess, the silver lining. So before giving this class, the good news over here is that, as they used to say when I was in the younger years, when only radio existed, and you were told, you should really go on radio. And when asked why, they would say, well, this way we could just turn you off. So the good news over here is, if you don't like what I say, that's totally okay. You could just turn me off, and fine, my life will go on and your life will go on. So let's continue. In giving this class, vaccination from a Torah perspective, I want to first, before we get to any conclusions, if we will, because this class is not so much a halachic class, it's more a Torah discussion class, I want to give you some of the premises, some of the ground rules on what Torah and how Torah approaches this question, so that you have the ideas and the approach of Torah so that you could perhaps make your own decision in yes or no. Different people, different personalities might reach different conclusions. I will tell you what I think is my conclusion. So let's enter that discussion. And again, also as a general guideline, the way Torah halacha works, especially in traditional Judaism, is that we don't approach things just from what we personally think, or personally feel, or what's practical. To give an example, should you drive on Shabbat? Should you drive to the synagogue on Shabbat? Now, there are two ways to approach that. One way to approach that is, well, it's very good to pray, and it's very good to pray in a community, and it's very good to pray and to bring, on Shabbat, and etc., etc. So, yeah, I'll drive a car. The way traditional Judaism approaches it is that the Word of God is eternal and has application and has guidance for all of history. So how does one decide if one should drive a car or not when cars didn't even exist a couple of hundred years ago? And the way it's approached from, again, a traditional Torah approach is from top down. We try to find precedent in earlier law, established law, or in the Talmud, and we ask ourselves, okay, how does that apply to this given situation? So to use the example of a car, what will happen is we will analyze what is the definition of fire that the Torah says one should not ignite a fire on Shabbat. That's a clear statement in the Torah. Then we look in the Talmud of how they apply this law in given situations. For example, whether cooking via the sun's heat is permitted or forbidden. And then we take it and apply it to the modern discussion at hand, in this case, the car. So that's how Jewish law evolves in maintaining its integrity and connection to God's word, and then applying it to the day-to-day discussion. And usually it's done so by legal great Torah scholars and who have a vast knowledge and a deeper understanding and feel for how the Torah approaches things. And that's how we try to reach a conclusion. And often there are differences of opinion, of course, amongst great Torah scholars, and then we have to see how we apply it in our own life, and there's guidelines for that as well. So in this case, I want to first talk about a little bit of where we start. So the first area that we need to understand, and I want to also give credit where credit is due, and as the Mishnah says, that whoever says something in the name of the person who said it brings redemption to the world. Much of this class is based on an article written by Rabbi Yehuda Sherpin. He is a Chabad rabbi, I believe, in St. Louis. He wrote an article which you can find at Chabad.org. And, I went through his article. I will insert some of my own thoughts here and some of my own sort of knowledge on how to apply his article, which was not written during a pandemic per se. It's just a general article on vaccinations, which I know is a very passionate issue. Okay, so first and foremost, we need to underscore that Torah's approach to health and guarding our health. I want to over here read from the a statement of the it's health in general is not optional. If you decide not to take care of your health, you're actually violating a mitzvah in the Torah. The Torah says, "Ushmartem me'od lenafshotechem." You shall very, very carefully guard your soul, meaning your health. In fact, in halacha, there's various areas where this is discussed. Like just to read one to give you an example from Maimonides. Maimonides says, and it's also based. Let me actually back up. It's also based on one of the mitzvahs of the Torah, which is that you must. In those days, it was very common that the roofs of homes were used for gardening, for growing different types of fruits and drying fruits, figs, dates, etc. It was a more common area of people hanging out, and the Torah says that one must put a fence upon their roof so no one should fall and be injured. And by extension, Jewish law sees this as a mitzvah, in addition to what I mentioned before, that one must take acts to protect oneself from harm, including taking care of one's health. And doing things that are unhealthy is forbidden in the Torah. Exactly what that constitutes, does that mean you can't eat potato chips? So these are all discussions and beyond the scope of this one class, as we want to stick more to vaccination. In fact, I'm just quoting over here from the Code of Jewish Law. I'm going to read over here, I have it on my screen. It's just as there is a positive commandment to build a guardrail around the perimeter of a rooftop lest someone fall, so too, says Rabbi Yosef Cairo in the famous Code of Jewish Law, so too we are obligated to guard ourselves from anything that would endanger our lives. As the verse states, only guard yourself and greatly guard your soul. Okay, that's number one. Torah also views, and very clearly, and this has ramifications and also in broader areas, Torah views our bodies as not something that we personally own, but more as a gift and as a pikadon. A pikadon means a mashkon, something given for you to safeguard. The exact word now skips my mind, but something that you must safeguard. In fact, Maimonides says in the beginning of the rules of how to deal with a murderer, says Maimonides, and I believe this differs from Maimonides says, actually I'm not certain about that, so I'll back up. Maimonides says that the Bezdin, the Jewish court, is prohibited from taking any monetary replacement for punishment of a murderer. Even if he says, you know what, I'll pay $1 million, I'll pay $2 million to the family or to the court, whatever it is, just let me go free. You're not allowed to do that. They must judge the murderer. And even if the Goel Hadam is the family member who is sort of pressing charges or so on, says, I forgive him, leave him alone, Maimonides says, based on Jewish law, based on the Talmud and so on, based on the Torah, that you're not allowed to do that. He uses the word she'ein haguf kinyan nafshe. The body is not something that is his own acquisition. It is God's, and he's given it to us for safekeeping, and therefore there's nothing worse than taking the life of a fellow human being, and this person must be judged. So these are just some background laws in terms of health in general. Okay? The first time that, I don't know if it's the first time, but one of the most prominent mentions of the obligation that one should avoid danger at the time of a plague is from the famous halachic authority, the Ramah. Any yeshiva student that learns Jewish law knows who the Ramah is. Rav Moshe Isserles, I believe he was the chief rabbi, I believe, of Prague, or maybe Frankfurt am Main, I'm not sure, one of the big Jewish cities at the time in Czechoslovakia. And he writes the story like that. He writes the halacha. He's dealing with a plague that broke out in his time, and he says, if a plague breaks out in your city, you are obligated to flee the city. This is before, of course, there was vaccinations and stuff like that. He says you are obligated to flee the city. And he goes even further, and he says that not the Shalah, the holy Shalah, Reb Shai Levi Horowitz says that not only are you obligated to flee the city, you are obligated to flee with your family and with your kindalach, with your children. If something, God forbid, happens to your children, you are held liable for not removing them from danger. So this is the discussion of the Ramah and the Shalah HaKodesh. Okay? Now, the first time, so this so far establishes very clearly that one must do whatever they can to avoid harming oneself, to avoid putting themselves in a place of danger. There is a halacha in the Talmud, for example, that you're not allowed to walk into a ruin where the walls are very sort of very unstable, and because one is not allowed to place themselves in a place of danger, and so these are establishing those clear, uncomplicated or non-complicated premises for this discussion. However, the question then becomes about vaccination. Vaccination is a little bit more complicated, as we will continue now to discuss. Now, I want to mention over here from one of the known commentators. This is when we started to have vaccinations. This is when, where during the 19th century, when the smallpox vaccine came out, one of the, again, great commentators that this is Rabbi Yisrael Lipschitz on the Mishnah Torah. So he went ahead, he wrote on the Mishnah, he wrote the commentary called Tiferet Yisrael, and he wrote the following. Okay, this is where we get a little bit more personal, because the reason why vaccinations can't, of course, be drawn from the above ruling that one must flee the city is because fleeing the city doesn't in its own entail, of course, any danger. You could argue that it does, uprooting yourself, especially in those days where you don't know where your food will come from. There are risks getting on the road of attack. So one can argue that you could use that ruling to apply to vaccinations as well, because there is a danger of uprooting and fleeing yourself from the city. Just like vaccinations, the argument against is all the risks involved, or one of the arguments. There's more arguments, as we might touch upon as we continue this discussion. But vaccinations, the argument against is that it has inherent risks. And one can argue that this ruling of the Ramah, who is one of the most respected halachic authorities of generations, that it would apply also to vaccinations, that one must do whatever it takes to avoid danger, a pandemic, and so on. But the argument against is that, as people argue, that there's no inherent danger in fleeing a city, and we must also add, which is a little more vague and is not discussed in this article, is what constitutes danger. And that's a very important discussion in deciding, in having this discussion. What constitutes danger? A plague in the times of the Talmud had certain definitions of what constitutes a plague. Today, with much better medical treatment, solutions, and so on, what constitutes a danger? So these are some discussions that we might have as we move along over here. So let's move along. So getting back to Rabbi Yisrael Lipschitz, or pronounced as Rabbi Yisrael Lipschutz, so he ruled, during smallpox, he ruled that despite, I'm quoting over here the article, that despite the risk of death from the smallpox vaccine, and at the time the risk of death was considered to be 1 in 1,000, one should get vaccinated. That was Rabbi Yisrael Lipschutz's ruling, that one should get vaccinated. And the reason was, I did not look, and I did not have the time to look up his actual ruling, but I'm going to presume his ruling is that the risk of 1 to 1,000 is does not warrant you not taking the vaccine, which I'm going to presume that at the time the risk of death from chickenpox was a lot higher than that number. Because, okay, so that's that. Now, I will also go a little further, and this becomes a bit of a more important guideline, because this is from the Rebbe Nachum Mendel Schneerson, of our generation, Torah leader, Jewish preeminent leader of our time, and therefore his opinion, of course, carries all that weight in deciding what we do. but there's always nuances that need to be considered. So therefore, bear with me until the end, where I will try to give as best as possible a clear conclusion to these discussions. Okay. In 1957, that is when a letter was written to the Rebbe about the polio vaccine. And the Rebbe writes to him the following. The Rebbe writes to him at the time that since at the time it was already, I guess, quite a few have already taken the vaccine. And the Rebbe writes, I read here a quote from the letter. The Rebbe writes that since this is the middle of the quote, he says, I have answered. I'm surprised by your question. He says, I've written to already many, and he says the following, I've answered to them in the affirmative, that they should take the vaccine, since the overwhelming majority of individuals do so here in the United States successfully. This was a person who wrote from Israel. And therefore the Rebbe says, since the overwhelming majority of individuals have done so successfully, therefore you should go ahead and take the vaccine. And then the Rebbe also adds an interesting little tidbit on that, because that's a little bit part of the discussion we have today between Moderna, Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson. The Rebbe writes like this, understandably, if there are inoculations that are produced by multiple pharmaceutical companies, you should use the ones whose product have been safely tried and proven. Okay? It seems, and now this could be read in two ways. Just thinking out loud, it's just a point that's coming to me right now as we are discussing this issue. Whose product could maybe mean this particular vaccine, or whose product could maybe mean that in general they have a track record of producing safe drugs and pharmaceuticals. So that's maybe a little bit up for discussion. I'll leave it to you, the listener, to think about that. And I'll think about that as well. Okay. In the spring of 1956, the Rebbe wrote the following. The Rebbe writes here a principle which can be applied not just to the polio vaccine, but can be applied more broadly. But we could poke some holes in terms of its application to today's situation. But this is the principle, and it's a principle based on Torah, because remember, this is a Torah class. This is not a class of what you'll see, what is the majority opinion. This is not a class of what your favorite talk show host does. Listen to your favorite talk shows, be entertained. This is a class, and by the way, I can't hold myself in, so bear with me. The audience that I give this class to over here is, most of you are people that I know. We have a relationship, a friendship, and so on. So this class is more Hamish. It's not like a more formal lecture. So we could be a little more honest and open. I want to say that I think that one of the ills of today is that there's too much group thinking. This is just my thought. There's too much group thinking, and because we keep on listening to the people that we always like to listen to, and we become so immune in a sense of hearing and being open to other opinions. And who was it who said, some Macher, famous guy, I forgot his name, said that if we just keep on listening to our own opinions, we just become more radical in our thoughts. And that's very true in today's world, where we have access to so much, and yet we keep on very much listening only to the people we like to hear and we agree with. And as a result, what happens is a lot of very group thinking without people really thinking for themselves. And it's important to be able to hear other opinions and sometimes make a decision based on that. So just throwing that in. So here the Rebbe establishes a principle, and I want to make it clear there are some holes that could be poked at this, not in the Rebbe's thoughts, because the Rebbe is Torah, and that's what we're discussing over here, is the Torah opinion. So here the Rebbe says a principle, but its application to today's situation could be questioned, as we'll be discussed. So the Rebbe over here says that there's a mandate, there's something in the Torah called Al Tifrosh Min HaTzibur, do not separate yourself from the community. And that's a mandate that is mentioned in Pirkei Avot and Ethics of the Fathers, which incidentally we begin to learn now between Passover and for the rest of the summer. Now, having said this, is like this. Here, I'm quoting from the Rebbe of the following. He says like this, and with regards to such, in regards to such matters such as these, there's an axiom which is the following: do not set yourself apart from the community. Al tifrosh min hatzibur. You should act according to that which is done by the parents of the majority of the children who are in your children's classes. Obviously, in this case, the parent asked about whether they should give their kids vaccines for school and so on, and this was the answer, the reply that the Rebbe gave to this person: Al tifrosh min hatzibur, do not separate yourself from the community. Remind me if I forget that there's a point I want to say at the end of the class. You could wave. So hopefully I'll remember. Okay, let me just jot it down. Okay, now, in Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, also one of the preeminent Torah halachic authorities of the previous generation, said that if someone is able to get the vaccine only on Shabbat, and if he doesn't do it on Shabbat, he will not be able to get this vaccine. He's allowed to violate Shabbat because causing a wound within your arm, or wherever the vaccine is placed, is a violation of Shabbat, a biblical violation of Shabbat. He says you're allowed to do that. That's how far he went in saying, yes, you should get the vaccine or be vaccinated. Now, the issue at hand today, let's try to bring this together again for the limitation of time. There's a discussion over here is, mandating vaccines. Can you mandate vaccine? Now, before, I want to make it clear, all this discussion till now does not yet answer whether now in the COVID situation you should get vaccine. I want to make that clear. We're going to get to that. Okay? Excuse me. L'chaim. This is all drawing upon earlier discussion, from the Torah going down somewhat the generations and seeing what the Torah perspective is. As I understand it. I want to make that clear. As I understand it, as I perceive it, and as I'm, learning, and the limited learning, because you could learn and learn and learn, because there are various opinions. There are opinions, for example, just to digress over here, where did I see this? Even with regards to the situation with the polio vaccine, where was this? That we quoted from Rabbi Lipschutz, right? Hold on a second. Bear with me over here. Even with regards to that, so there was actually, by the way, Eminut, I'm with you. Stay with me. There's discussion, for example, which says that yes, during the time of Rabbi Lipschutz, the smallpox was very, very prevalent, and people were dying from nalazaitin from all sides. But today, we're basically many of the things that you get vaccinated for have been basically eliminated. That discussion sort of is mute and does not apply because the risks are extremely low. So it's like one risk versus the other: the risk of taking the vaccine versus the risk of getting the disease or whatever it might be, which is extremely low. Okay, I'm just telling you different opinions, and there are various opinions on some of the other issues. Again, because there's a limitation of time, we can't go through all of them. Now, can you mandate vaccines? This is a real discussion and an issue. This is an issue about the passport for vaccines, and it's a very hotly debated and issue. Now, what it is clear that in a time when there is a very clear and present danger, where it's definite that like a plague that's really ravaging the community and so on, that you could actually halachically mandate for people to get health treatment or get vaccines and so on, so it appears is the prevailing opinion. Okay, now let's bring this home to today in the COVID situation. I will present to you what I think from a halachic Torah perspective. I'm not talking about from a political perspective. And you have extremists on both sides where don't take the vaccine because the government is putting in chips into your body, or the other way, that if you don't take the vaccine you're a murderer. I don't usually talk in those terms. And again, as I said in the beginning of the class, if you have the very strong opinions, this class is probably not for you. But let's talk to the person who says, okay, I want to know what the Torah perspective is. So I want to give various sides over here based on my sense and feel after looking through some of the commentaries. What would be the issues? The issues would be, there is a pandemic now. This is not just vaccines against protecting yourself, inoculating yourself against diseases that might come to be. There are real diseases. This is a real pandemic. And the question at this point is the danger real? Is the danger real? I think we could conclude that the danger is real. However, the counter argument is that the medical treatment that exists today is thank God quite well, that the risks or the chance of a healthy person who does not have any underlying issues is very, very minuscule. I don't know the exact numbers, but it's very, very minuscule. And on the other hand, the vaccines that are available are new. The way I understand, and I'm not a medical doctor or professor, of the three, the Johnson & Johnson is more based on more traditional vaccines. Does that mean it's better, safer? Ich weiß nicht. I don't know the numbers. I don't know the statistics. That wasn't so necessary for me in terms of giving this class. So these are the key, I think, two sides of the issue. The one side again is that the risk of anything occurring to you is very, very low if you are healthy. And the concern about the safety of the vaccine, because it's new, geves, who knows? I think those are the two more reasonable sort of argument on one side. On the other side is the argument, vaccines definitely help protect even the vulnerable. I'm not sure if that statement is 100% correct, because apparently even if you take the vaccine, that does not mean that you are not a carrier. You might still be able to affect, but in general, it definitely reduces by and large in terms of creating herd immunity. And if I'm wrong in some of these statements, you're welcome to point that out. I'm totally okay. Or you could turn me off. Remember that. You could just turn me off. But my understanding is, and the argument, again, for the vaccines is it's relatively safe. Millions and millions and millions of people have taken it. The risk of it is minuscule, at least what we know today. And again, the counter argument is we don't know, because it could be in 5 years from now. Just at the risk of joking on such a serious issue, I hope that's okay. A family member, discussing the vaccine, whether I should take, I shouldn't take. Me personally said, how could you take it? It affects your genetic makeup. I said, no, maybe if my genetic makeup is affected, maybe I'll become a better person. As my family member, you think I'm not that perfect. Who knows? Maybe it'll make me better. Okay, that's on the lighter side, and I know it's a little risky to joke about serious things like this. But as I said before, we're with a Hamisher crowd over here. We're talking, but on getting back on a more serious note, so the normal discussion, arguments back and forth, where normal people could sit down and have differences of opinion is, Okay, we don't know the long-term risks. Short-term, it definitely appears based on the data that we have now that they are relatively safe. I know some of the more radical thinking is, oh, they're hiding data. I mean, I don't, you know, I don't rule according to that, because then it's what they call in Hebrew ein ledavar sof. You could always drive yourself crazy and live in fear and make yourself meshuggah. But based on what we're knowing and seeing, the argument for would be it's relatively safe. Vaccines have always been safe. It reduces the risk both for yourself and for those around you. It allows society to get back to normal. All the effects of COVID, of how it's affected society, livelihoods, mental health, etc., etc. I mean, I have someone in the community that was looking for psychiatric help because they were like really troubled by a lot of things that are going on, and I can't even get an appointment with a psychiatrist because the psychiatrists are even, you know, are so overbooked because people are so affected by this. So these are the arguments for and so on, and the arguments against. I think I've made the points clear. Now, what's the bottom line? What's the bottom line? What would I think Torah tell you to do? So I want to base myself on 2 points. One point is what I said before from the Rebbe, al tifresh min hatzibur, do not separate yourself from the community, and that's a Torah mandate. And the point I wanted to say before is that there's a difference between Torah mandates and just any other opinion. We have this innate belief that if you follow the Torah mandate, you will have protection from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you'll have protection from God Almighty. So it's not just an opinion. Okay, let me tell you here an opinion, but I have another opinion. You're entitled to your other opinion. But if we follow, as we say whenever we lift the Torah, right? Eitz chayim hi lamachazikim ba v'somcheha meushar. It's always good to sing a little bit. Eitz chayim hi, it's a tree of life for those who hold on to it. If we follow the Torah mandate, then it gives us life from the giver of all life. So if you're in doubt, you're not sure what to do, following the Torah, I mean, in general, following the Torah, but especially if you're in doubt, following the Torah way is not just an opinion, it is a way of receiving God's blessing. So first, we have this mandate that the Rebbe tells us, al tifrosh min hatzibur, do not separate yourself from the community. The holes in this, as I mentioned before, is that it's a little bit too early to say that the majority are taking, because the majority have probably not taken it. And that's up for discussion, and I'll let you make that decision. Whether you think that the tzibur, the general crowd, is taking vaccines, and if that's the case, then do not separate yourself from the majority, as the Rebbe's directive based on ethics of the fathers is al tifresh min hatzibur, and with that you will receive the protection of any concern that the vaccine might harm you, or vice versa. If the majority that of your community or whatever it is not taking the vaccine, rely on the majority, and you will receive the protection in that manner. Although I believe that it's more safe and more honest to say that the tzibur, the community in general, those who are able to get the vaccine, tend to be getting the vaccine. That's my sense over here. But you know, you could go with it as you wish. I'm just giving you the premise, and you could decide how to apply it. Another application, which is maybe equally and even more important, is another directive that the Rebbe would always give when it came to medical questions, and that is that you should ask a roife yedid, you should ask a doctor that you trust, a doctor who's a friend, either one or two doctors, and sometimes if there are a difference of opinion, ask a third doctor. But generally speaking, ask your doctor. Ask your doctor, especially if they're not, I mean, if they're politically caught up in all of this, then it would probably be a biased opinion. But I'm talking about in generally, your doctor that you trust with your heart, you trust with your brain, you trust with anything else. The Torah says, the Torah gives a special koach, a special power. It means God gives a special power to a doctor, to your doctor, to bring down, to give you the right decision for yourself. And therefore, I would say, instead of driving yourself crazy and reading every article that's out there, and you could get articles that of every opinion and every statistic, and you could drive yourself crazy and live in fear. And I know people like that, and we all know people like that are living, they're just not living, and it's just not healthy. Consult your doctor, and not only your doctor because he's a good guy, which I'm sure he is, but that's a Torah mandate. It's a Torah perspective. It's a Torah approach that you turn to your doctor when it comes to health issues. You could tell him your concerns, you could tell him your things, and then follow what he tells you. That is a Torah perspective. And by doing so, you will be, and if he tells you yes, yes, tells you no, no. And then just be sort of assured, have faith in Hashem, because the faith in itself draws down blessing from Hashem, that this is the right, correct decision, and that you and your family will be protected. And that is probably the most important conclusion of this class. So that is my talk on the issue over here. If you have an individual, if you wanted, a more individualistic answer for your particular case, you're welcome to reach out to me. But that's the thought over here, based again on what I believe our Torah giants have told us, and that's that. What's most important is you should have a great week. You should be healthy. May your family be healthy. May you be tolerant of others who maybe have a different opinion of you, and have a fantastic week. Thank you for listening. Please share these words of Torah. It's good to learn Torah. It's good. But by the way, I just want to actually conclude with one more quick thought, and that is a lesson, a spiritual lesson that we could learn from vaccinations. Whereas the Rebbe once related this, that the Rebbe talking about spiritual vaccinations, inoculating yourself, and this is very important. The Rebbe once mentioned this story that he spoke to a father and asked the father about giving his child a Torah education, and the father responded to the Rebbe that according to statistics, I don't know what year this was, that the risks of a child being negatively affected, I guess growing up in a home where the parents have certain values, but the risk of the child being negatively affected by the education was 5%, and therefore he's not concerned. Now again, I don't know, 5% sounds very low, but I don't know the exact background to this discussion, but this was the discussion that was had. So the Rebbe said to this parent, do you vaccinate your kids? And the parent said, of course, my kids' health, I vaccinate my kids. The Rebbe said, whatever the vaccination they were talking about, he says, the risk of your child getting whatever disease they were concerned at that time is 3 to 4%. That's the risk. Yet you vaccinate the child, even though by vaccinating your child, you're accepting other risks, but you made that decision. How much more so when it comes to inoculating your child's soul from all the spiritual diseases and crazy ideas that are so prevalent in society, as we see today, unfortunately, that in many areas the world is going a bissel mashiga, a little crazy. How much more so it is important to vaccinate. And how do you vaccinate? By giving both ourselves and our children more and more Torah ideas and thoughts and values, exposing them to and injecting them, so to speak, with the most potent of protective medicine, Torah, coming to the synagogue, values of our grandparents, great-grandparents, etc. So a little final lesson, very important lesson. Again, thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing. See you again next week. Everybody have a fantastic week. Sei gesund.